This episode is brought to you in partnership with Wacom. Across the globe, learning is still handwriting-centric, especially in mathematics and science. This can make the shift to digital tasks challenging. Many schools are seeking effective apps and hardware to ensure a smoother transition for digital learning, especially for STEM lessons.
Expanding digital pen and ink technology from teachers to students opens up new possibilities for communication and collaboration in and out of the classroom. Using pen-enabled devices, teachers and students can explain complex concepts, take notes, provide feedback, and show their work quickly and easily.
Wacom pen displays and tablets easily plug in to the existing IT equipment in the classroom, enabling members of the class to interact with the digital content being shared. The teacher never even needs to turn their back on the class. Collaboration is simple when working on shared documents and apps with the digital pen. There's no new software to learn. You just work with the pen on the screen or tablet instead of the mouse and keyboard on your computer.
As educators, myself, Steve, and Ben have all integrated the use of Wacom technology into where we've worked in education, into colleges and schools, and we have seen the benefits for ourselves. So go check it out for yourself. The link is in the show notes for this episode.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Just as I was about to come on, evening everybody, my kids have just started shouting, so apologies. Welcome, good evening. It's winter is starting to come. It's raining. The rain is hammering at the windows. It is episode 193 of the Edufuturists podcasts. Glad you could join us. Hopefully I'm speaking to somebody other than Dan and our guest and people are listening in. But yeah, really excited for the episode this evening. We're going to dive into some of the stuff we've been exploring recently. On what Dan is saying, the hinges, but I think the future of education and work this evening. So I'm really excited about that. We are missing Ben this evening. Ben's tied up, so can't join us, unfortunately. But I'm sure that me and Dan can move things forward and really dive into a real positive conversation this evening. So Dan, how are you doing, mate? Good week?
Yeah, all good, man. Looking forward to this episode. Really where my passion is and has been over the last year, so looking forward to it. But yeah, good week. Good win for Newcastle yesterday against Everton, staying in sixth position. So yeah,
I was going to say, is anybody not getting a result at Everton at the minute? But I can't remember. Leeds have probably got beat by him this season because literally that's just Leeds all over. But no, it's good to see the Newcastle coming back. Last year was a challenge for both Leeds and Newcastle, wasn't it? It wasn't a good season at the beginning, so it's nice to see it. So. Yeah,
and we've just picked ourselves up out of sheer determination.
Yeah, nothing to do with money,
nothing to do with money or anything like that. We've just nothing to do with being the richest club in the world now. But yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, a new car week for me, so exciting week.
Oh yeah, how's that going?
Always a good week getting a new car. It's good. Yeah, it's good. Got a BMW 1 Series, so enjoying driving that around at the minute.
It's always an interesting one when everybody says BMW to me now, because I did some transactional analysis through some coaching when I was still in education, and BMW now means bitching, moaning and whinging club, and how people respond differently to different messages, and there's a rebellious child and I can't remember what the other child was, but basically the one where it looks like they're going to do something, they're listening to you, they're happy, go away and basically tell people wow, they really feel behind you. So hopefully that's not what's going to happen in your car, Dan. And it's a good BMW.
I would never tell anyone what I really think about you behind your back, Steve.
We keep that outside of the podcast. Everybody thinks we're friends, Dan. But I'm just going to share what happens outside of the podcast. This evening, just before the call and before Adam joined us, I came on to Dan wearing an Oculus headset, exploring the metaverse and webcams, and it was such a real one because Dan obviously didn't have his headphones on, couldn't see me. And I walked into something where Dan was literally walking around.
Careful what you're saying here.
Yeah, he had his clothes on. I think he did. He could only see waist up. But yeah, I did say to our guests, we do ramble and waffle for about 5 minutes before we even invite people in. So should we get going? I'm really looking forward to this one. I think I'll bring Adam Roney in a second. Adam,
sorry,
myself.
I've already brought him.
It's all right. He's here. We've done it. But Adam, we'll get you to introduce yourself. But we met a couple of years ago, just at I don't want to say the height of the pandemic, but just into it, and we were exploring professional services, and I joined. Somebody reached out to me and asked if I wanted to be involved, and said as an expert, and I think I think you might have the wrong email. Turns out actually I did have something to say. It was a positive webinar, but it's good to see you in a different guise, Adam. And how's everything going?
Yeah, well, guys, I'm glad I took my VR headset off just before you dialed me in. But, yeah, no, really good, and yeah, great to be on the show. Thank you for having me. And Steve, yeah, in that past life, yeah, you absolutely were. We definitely got the right email address. You were our educational expert for what was a really interesting discussion, I guess, around the evolution of professional services, and as you say, at the height of the pandemic, how everybody was coping with things, and in particular, goodness me, education. Wow, what a series of challenges, the sector had to go through during the pandemic. And honestly, congratulations, I think, to every educator that got through it, because, I didn't have a son at the start of the pandemic, but one was born throughout. And I can only imagine what it must have been like as a parent, having children going through that and the remote learning, and as a practitioner having to try and adapt to all of the different ways of delivering content and media. So yeah, hugely impressive time. And very, very happy to be on the show and chat to you guys about Web3, blockchain, the metaverse and beyond.
Yeah, because education moved and went for a real... there's been talk of this paradigm shift for years, hasn't there? And this big shift from an education point of view that COVID has heightened it, brought it to the attention, and the skills level has gone up. But when we talk about what we just said, the blockchain and everything else, and we're going to dive into it in a second, I think people have reversed back to thinking digital and technology across all colleges, not just in the classroom, but Dan leads digital, and I work now as a CEO in an organisation that supports colleges. That actually, I still speak to people that do not have a digital strategy. It's an interesting one, because actually it's so much more than just than teaching and learning in a classroom. But Adam, do you want to just walk us through, as a starter, who you are? Obviously, the Calls9, what does that look like, and what was it, and what has that now become since the shift and around technology?
Yeah, sure. So Calls9 is a digital innovation and transformation agency, which means that we help principally businesses work out their digital strategy, and we either build new digital products and services or we improve existing ones. And been running the business for almost 12 years now, and throughout the vast majority of that time, we've been building what we would call, I guess, Web2 products and services. So digital software as you know and love it, and as we use it today, from simple websites, mobile apps, e-commerce experiences, customer portals, and beyond, really. And we've also done a bunch of work in the education space, helping with internal communication and knowledge management, and marketing initiatives and student outreach as well. But what happened, I guess, interestingly during the pandemic was that a proportion of our client base went pretty quiet, to be totally honest with you. And this caused us to kind of say, okay, well, where are the new growth opportunities? Where is the new market for us? And I'd been interested in Web3 for a really long time, but hadn't really felt that the technology had matured to a point where you could do many useful things with it. But over that period, we were fortunate enough to get involved with a number of projects and in a community where we actually got to flex our muscle a bit with that and actually start building and deploying some real Web3 applications and products and services. And for me, I would say that it's been one of the biggest shifts that we've gone through as a business in terms of moving in that direction very heavily. And as someone who's been building software for 20 years, I'll talk more about that in a minute, because I've been doing it pre-Calls9. It's really captured my imagination, and it's excited me in a way that I think the last time I felt this kind of seismic shift in technology was really with the advent of mobile, where you looked at mobile and you were like, this is clearly going to be a game changer, and we're going to consume technology completely differently. It's going to become part of our lives. It's going to become augmented, with our being in such a different way. Web3 excites me for lots of reasons that we'll explore to the same level of magnitude, really. So we have gone full steam ahead in that direction. And I've been fortunate enough to attend lots of conferences this year and sort of talk about it and give our vision for what we think the Web3 future will be. And even though elements of Web3, I think, are yet to fully crystallize, I would say the metaverse is one of those where it almost, it beguiles definition at the moment. And crypto has got a little bit of a bad rep in the last 6 months because of the investment cycle. The reality is that the underlying technology is very, very sound, and there are lots of exciting opportunities, I think, to take that forward. And maybe just to give you a bit of a sense of my background, before Calls9, I was a commercial corporate lawyer for a little while. I trained at a global law firm. And prior to that, as I said, I've been writing software for quite a long time. So I was fortunate that the school I was at encouraged me from a very, very young age to interact with software, to interact with technology. So I started programming when I was about 8 or 9 and was building websites by the time I was 13. And a lot of that was to do with the environment I was in, the academic setting I was in, and the opportunities I was given to basically play and experiment with technology. I think Web3 has got lots of the same characteristics for people today. There's a lot of fun that can be had by experimenting with this tech and trying to take it in different directions. So again, that's kind of, it's the sort of shortened version, but it's the story arc of sort of where I've come from, some of the things I've done, and why hopefully I think Web3 is going to be an interesting tech for us.
Yeah, definitely. And if anyone's listening and doesn't know much about it, I think it was episode 167 where we kind of talked over the basics of it, and 172 where we looked at kind of some implications for education as well. But I suppose everyone you speak to when it comes to Web3 or like has a different take on it because it's such a new technology, and I suppose where it's going to go in the next decade could be a number of various routes, from global domination if you talk to some people to just better software if you talk to some other people. So kind of what's led us to this? I guess without being too technical, but what is this technology that is powering NFTs, which people hear mainly because of art or Damien Hirst on the news? Was it Damien Hirst who was burning lots of his artwork last week?
Yep.
Yeah, because he turned some of them into NFTs. That what a lot of people will know of NFTs or heard of crypto, but they might not necessarily know that there's a common technology behind all of this new generation. And I guess, how is that different to the last 20 years of the internet, or last 30 years of the internet, I guess?
Yeah, well, to sort of like orientate the conversation, where I feel like we are, and this reference only means something to people of a certain age, but before the internet was sort of clearly identified as the internet, the journalists, the BBC, used to refer to it as the information superhighway. And if you go, you might even be able to get the videos on YouTube, pictures of roads and cars and things were coming up on screens, because they didn't really know what this thing was. They just had a sense that it was going to be able to transfer information at speed between people. And what eventually happened over time was that the terminology settled down. We called it the internet, and then there were companies that commercialized it in a way that consumers and normal people could access. That's kind of what's happening with blockchain and what we call Web3. So Web3 to me contains blockchain, and it contains the metaverse, and it's characterized by identity, experience, and ownership in a way that what's come before hasn't. It's not a new technology, really. It's been around for, over a decade now. But the reality is that it's only really just reaching maturity and the potential for mass adoption in the last 12 months. I mean, depending on some people you talk to, it could even be within the last 6 weeks, because we've had something called the Ethereum merge that's happened, which I can talk about in more detail, which basically means it's faster and you can do more things with it now than you could do before. But the tech's been around for quite a long time. What initially drove that tech was a radical view of the world, to say that actually centralized ownership in a single company or a single entity's hands can be quite risky, right? Those entities can disappear, and ultimately what happens to all the information that has been stored there, it can be lost forever. So blockchain is a sort of solution to that in its simplest form. It's a way to share information. It's a way to share computer processing capability across this distributed network, so that instead of Microsoft having all your data or Google having all your data, it's shared across the blockchain. So a single entity does not control your data. As a byproduct from that, we get cryptocurrency. And crypto has lots of different functions in Web3, but one of its functions is basically to maintain the network, to incentivize people to set up nodes, to replicate this information and to keep it running. So crypto is a really interesting part of Web3, but it's not the whole of it. And I think this is one of the big things that we get confused about, is that they almost look like they're inseparable from each other, but they are actually quite distinct entities. And so, you don't have to get caught up in the crypto hype to think that blockchain is potentially a useful technology. So you've got this foundational layer where information is distributed instead of being centrally stored. And we've got this idea of tokenization, which is things that live on the blockchain and which can be shared, purchased, traded, and moved around. All of that evolves into what we now know as NFTs, which are essentially a specific type of token, a specific type of smart contract that live on the blockchain, and they contain some information, and attached to that information is, in most cases, some form of picture, which is where we kind of are with NFTs at the moment. Because the blockchain is always true, it's immutable, we can use this technology to say this copy of this picture is the original copy of it. And we can verify that because of the way the blockchain technology works. So it's lent itself to art really nicely, because if you want to know you've got the original copy of that piece of artwork, then the blockchain essentially has the characteristics to let you prove that. Because it can also deal with cryptocurrency, it means you can also make money by trading these pieces of artwork. So again, there's another reason why art has naturally lent itself to the blockchain. And so people have kind of jumped on this and said, right, we're going to use NFTs, we're going to create art collections. They're called drops sometimes when they're sort of released en masse, and people can pay for them in cryptocurrency. They can own them and have an original piece of artwork. The NFT technology, though, has lots and lots of other use cases. And really, what you're seeing now is sort of, I'm not even really sure I'd call it version 1 of where we're going to end up. We're kind of in 0.1 maybe at this stage, because if you think about what the NFT is really doing, it's saying this is the true copy, true version of this piece of information. And we could apply that to lots of different things. We could apply that to passports, to driving licenses, to other types of identity documentation, potentially to academic grades. So I think that tech is going to rapidly evolve into all sorts of different use cases. And you're already seeing some companies do this. Starbucks has launched its loyalty program on a network called Polygon, which is a very, very large network. And so they're using effectively NFTs in the blockchain to give people loyalty points for their Starbucks activity. FIFA is doing the same thing with football player images and videos and assets. Again, kind of a loyalty play. So that tech at the moment, it will go beyond apes and yachts and Damien Hirst, and it will move into lots of different areas. And it's really only one strand of what's happening on the blockchain. There are lots and lots of developments taking place, but it's the one that's kind of caught people's imagination and attention, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. And I think what excites me is that is when it comes into the real world. Like, I know there's a lot of the talk is around kind of it being able to manage ownership in the digital world, digital assets, and that very much links in with the metaverse. But I like that. I'm sure I read something a few months ago about somebody was experimenting it with a lock for your house. So because you had the NFT that was unique and that could open the lock on your house. And I just thought that the implications for real world are phenomenal as well. And again, like you say, it's very early stages. Where does that go? Where does that lead?
Well, I think it's interesting as well. So the metaverse, my view is you're already in the metaverse is my first observation. I think you've been in the metaverse since you've been holding a phone in your pocket that's had access to, broadly speaking, unlimited information. But if you think about the ownership and transactional side of that, it's been a little bit clunky, really. And I think blockchain can be a solution to that. So digital keys, digital passports, IRL experiences, so exclusive access to venues, concerts, all this sort of thing absolutely is possible through blockchain. And one of the questions people say is, well, can't you do that with Web 2 technology? Why is this different? Well, you can do some of it with Web 2 technology. There's no doubt about that. But the issue with it is that Web 2 technology is completely centralized. So if you want to truly own something, I mean, let's take the example of unlocking the key to your house, right? If that's on Google's server and Google disappears or someone else disappears, you've lost the key to your house. That's unfathomable. You never want to be in that position. So the blockchain, because it's decentralized, it removes that from the equation. It means that when you own something digitally, you really do own it, and you own it permanently. And that is much more difficult to do with Web 2 technology.
It's a really interesting one, because we've been, as Dan said, we've gone back through different episodes. We've had some great ones where we've explored it in terms of its definition, looking into it, and I think you've done a great job of reimagining that and bringing it to life and putting it into a context as well, Adam. But then we also explored the school down the college where the decentralization, decentral aliens, and learning about NFTs and everything else that goes with it.
Invisible College.
Invisible College. I was going to say Invincible College. I was like, I knew what that wasn't right. So we then delved into actually what does that look like, and we put it into the context of real education in the US, where people are paying hundreds of thousands of pounds to go through an education system that doesn't guarantee them getting a job. So they kind of create this whole ethos of NFTs and owning an NFT, buying it, but that potentially grows in value as an NFT in terms of its value as an item, but also that unlocks a world of people recording and delivering and upskilling each other on NFTs, blockchain, all of those kind of things, it's exceptional, really, because when you put it into context, and we're going to delve into education further at some point, but even just in that context, education is so centralized that they have the control. And when you talk about, and I know we won't go into it because we must have covered 90% of episodes for beginning of the time around awarding bodies and organizations, that they have you sit your exam, you've given all that time, but if you want another copy of it and you lose it, what does that look like to get it back, because it's owned by somebody else? And if that awarding body goes out of business, and there have been awarding organizations that got out of business, you can't even get your certificate anymore. But if you own it, and I think there's all of that to kind of unpick. But I think the big fear of not just education, and the big thing of education and the world is, because, like you said, we're maybe not even in version 1, people still see it as still immature. You've said it's been 10 years and it's just maturing now. But they're thinking, well, we don't need to worry about it, and we'll learn it in a few years because it's not really there yet. But I think what you're seeing and what we're going to talk about is the fact that right now, companies, the technology is being used in the real world in context, and we need to get ready for it now and prepare people for it, because it's going to grow and it's going to develop while we're actually in it, rather than thinking about joining it in 10 years' time or 20 years' time. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. And I mean, it's when people sort of look at you in disbelief, and I'll explain why I think everything you've said is completely true. I just take people back to, okay, well, let's talk about the internet. I mean, by the time, depending on who you ask, 94, 95, 96, around that time, the internet became publicly available to consumers. The technology had been around for a very, very long time before then. I mean, it was used in an academic setting, right, for academic institutions to communicate with each other. Before that, it was used in a military setting for the military to communicate with each other. So by the time we got it, it had been around a while, and it still didn't really make a lot of sense to most consumers. I remember, people saying, why would I ever need to put my business on the internet? I mean, this is a conversation people had. I will never need to put my business on the internet. My business will never need a website. People will phone me. They'll use the yellow pages. You mean I'm going to be taking orders from people that I can't see? Who's going to put their credit card into? I mean, all of these statements that at the time people just completely believed. And then you look at where we are now, and it's just ridiculous to think that we even slowed down and paid homage to those things. People just couldn't see the vision for what was coming. And now it's so obvious. And of course, what we're doing today is undeniably Web 2. social, video, communication, streaming. This was not, Web 1 wasn't able to do this. So you're on version 2 now. So, Web 3.1, if that's where we're headed, right? I mean, you can transact cryptocurrencies globally, instantaneously. You can store information on the blockchain now. You can create hundreds of NFTs in a matter of minutes. This technology is all there. The issue for consumers is, I still think the language is too confusing, and the interface to it is a little bit clunky. You have to physically install a wallet, and then you have to put things in this wallet, and there's all these barriers to it. You could argue it's no different to a web browser. I mean, when you turned on a computer in 94, you had to open a web browser to use the internet. What was a web browser? It was another piece of software. So I think the parallels are pretty strong for dealing with the terminology, accepting that there's a bit of an adaptation required for the wallets. Eventually, they'll be baked into web browsers by default, baked into devices by default. It won't be a separate thing you need to install. But then the third and most important thing, really, in terms of driving mass adoption, is businesses and brands and institutions actually using the technology. The fact that Starbucks is willing to put, I think it's called Starbucks Odyssey. But the fact they're actually baking NFT technology, Web3 technology into their global loyalty program for 30 million users, that is going to drive adoption. Warner Brothers Studios has literally, either today or within the last couple of days, created a new Twitter account called Warner Brothers NFT, which is going to list all of their NFTs that you can access. Instagram and Facebook now have native NFT support baked into the application. So, these are not companies that are playing around. These are people who have committed to the technology and are going big on it. And they will drive mass adoption. So I think, nothing in technology is beautiful and linear and always clear. But I think the direction of travel is set in motion here. We've got big brands that are really getting behind it. One last example for you is that Google obviously has a cloud computing division called GCP. And in the last week, they announced that you can now pay for your GCP services in cryptocurrency. That, again, this is not a small move. That's a big move. So I think the direction of travel is clear, but there are still bumps in the road. There's still barriers to overcome. Consumer education, the interface with the technology, and actually, having genuine use cases as well.
I think I completely agree with everything you said, Adam. And I think one thing that I keep coming back to is to take like the macro view of this technology in the context of how the world works at the moment. And I always come back to this stumbling block, really, of decentralization kind of is in, to a certain extent, is in opposition to how power is gained and how power is demonstrated in the world today. And I'm going really big, like macro on this in terms of view, but it's a stumbling block I come back to because I think it makes absolute sense to me and is completely rational because of the level of this technology. And if you understand anything about the technology, you see that it's miles better in terms of what we've got at the minute, and it has to win out. We can't put this back in the box now and go, well, let's pretend like that technology doesn't exist and let's just carry on the way it was. It will win out, but I see it, and I don't know if you might think differently to this, but I see almost we're going to have a lot of conflict for this to become mainstream as well, because even just take the typical corporations, they're very centrally run, like you mentioned before, like how corporations, big global corporations like Google, like Microsoft, and all of them, they're very centrally run. If the technology is going to exist for things to be decentrally run, like if we're talking about a DAO or something like that, and then even, I mean, the financial system, I mean, for millennia, the most powerful people in the world have centralized access to the financial system. And we're talking about a financial system that could replace that and be completely decentralized. My first thought is there's quite a few people who own quite a bit of quite a bit of firepower that aren't going to want that to happen. And we see at the minute, like people like Putin, like, who are exploring and I think are creating their own, trying to create their own digital blockchain-based currencies, but they're not going to be decentralized in the same way that we see in other cryptocurrencies, because they're still going to want power over them. And I guess it would just be great to get your take on how, do you see this coming to a bit of a crux within different industries, within different sectors around the world? And can true decentralization win out in the end?
So I think, I mean, it's a great set of questions. I think it's like everything in life, whether it's all about frame of reference. So whether something is centralized or decentralized, I mean, there's a sort of purists definition of it, but even their definition falls apart a little bit. You know, if I said to you, you know, across Bitcoin and across Ethereum, the nodes that run those networks, they're measured in the tens of thousands. They're not measured in the millions. So is that fully decentralized? Is that partially decentralized? I'm not sure, but they're knowable entities. We can count them. It's a bit like the internet. You know, the internet in theory is borderless, limitless, and anything can connect to it. Anything can be added to it. Okay, notwithstanding some of the physical limitations of running out of IP addresses and things like that. But in theory, anybody can come on and play ball as long as you agree to the protocols and you communicate. But the practicality of it is that for there to be a consumer interface, you need to have brands that solve different parts of the problem chain, right? So we have internet service providers because it's too difficult for us to work out how to do that ourselves. So we pay Virgin Media, BT, whoever it might be, to connect to the internet. So that is a more centralized way of attaching ourselves to a decentralized network. And the bigger those players become, the more power they have over how that network looks and feels. You know, going back to Web 1, AOL would be a really good example of this, where, you know, you used to open up AOL and the internet was a button. You know, the rest of it was just AOL's walled garden, news, stocks, photos, whatever. It was all technically the internet, but they walled you off into a little square that was called the internet. We don't want that to happen with blockchain and Web3, and I don't think it will. I think it's going to be closer to the thing you've got at the moment with Web2, which is that big brands are already appearing who are controlling different parts of the ecosystem to make it more convenient for consumers and brands to interact with each other. So I'm a pragmatist rather than a purist about it. I think that's probably fine. You know, I'm talking to you in an open source browser, sure, but it's sitting on top of a proprietary system, which is my Mac. So I think that technology as a whole is probably, for it to really advance, it requires combinations of public, private, open source, closed source, centralized, decentralized. In terms of the financial system, though, I think there's two reasons why it will never be fully decentralized. I think the first is that if you had all of your savings, instead of it was in, you know, NatWest, HSBC or wherever, but if it was sat on your MacBook in your wallet and that wallet got stolen, you have lost everything. You know, there's no consumer protection. There's no way of getting that back. I think that's an ultra risky situation for people to be in. And I think it's completely unrealistic. I think most people don't want to be a bank from start to finish. But I think there are parts, again, of the financial process that you should have more control over. So if I want to send you money, I'm not really sure why I need lots of intermediaries to do that. So I think the storage of finance versus the movement of cash is a different thing. And I think actually on the storage side, I think lots of people will retain a traditional bank account for lots of different reasons. But on the movement side, I think it can be fully decentralized. I think it potentially can be on the payments processing side as well. It gets a little bit complicated at this stage, but essentially the big thing that's happening in the blockchain space at the moment is the development of what we call layer 2 solutions. So layer 1 is the actual blockchain itself, whether that's Ethereum or another. And when you write transactions to that chain, there's a cost associated with doing with it, and there's a speed associated with doing it. There's a maximum transaction processing volume. Layer 2 solutions have come along and sort of said, we'll solve this, we'll make it faster and we'll make it cheaper. Essentially, we'll make it more convenient. But when you interact with a layer 2, you're not interacting with the main blockchain. So that has, again, gone from a fully decentralized solution into a partially decentralized solution. And actually in finance, we do this all the time anyway. If I said to you, we're out and about and I said, listen, let's pay for something. Well, the layer 1 equivalent of you paying for it is you going to the bank, pulling the money out, giving it to the guy. And sometimes you do that, but sometimes it's not convenient. The layer 2 solution is you hand over a credit card. The credit card makes it convenient. It isn't really your bank. It isn't really your money. There's a whole process that happens to reconcile your bank account to your credit card. But you use your credit card because it's convenient. So I think what's going to happen with Web3 is that the core tech is going to always be decentralized, but there's going to be these convenience layers that get put on top, which we call layer 2 and layer 3 solutions, to make it easier, faster, and cheaper to interact with the chain. And from my perspective, as long as they're done in the right way, I think that's okay. Blockchain purists would not be happy about this, but I think it's a pragmatic solution to a very real world problem. I mean, to give you an example, Ethereum 1.0 could only process 14 transactions a second globally. 14 transactions a second. They've done this thing called the Ethereum merge, where they've upgraded it, and it can now do something like 100,000 transactions a second. So it's significantly faster than it was before. But it still is nowhere in comparison to the amount of transactions Visa is processing per second or MasterCard is processing per second. It's light years away. So I think it will evolve. I think it's going to be a hybrid world, some centralization, some decentralization. And maybe just to sort of wrap this point off, I think that what you'll find is the phrase blockchain is a bit amorphous. So if I say to you internet, what does it mean? Does it mean Amazon Web Services? Does it mean Google? Does it mean Microsoft? Well, it kind of means all of them, doesn't it? And there are some things that are really important to you that you store in different parts of the internet, and there are other things that are less important. I think blockchain will become the same. You will have different bits of the blockchain for storing different types of information. Healthcare data will live in a certain place. Your NFTs could live in a certain place. I think that's where it will go, rather than being one thing eats all. And I think the internet is a pretty good model for that, because that's exactly what's happened with cloud computing and internet storage generally.
It's an interesting one when you talk about healthcare. When you go through a process of becoming a parent and the whole process of that, you might work with a midwife, your local GP service. You might then go to one hospital to then go to a different hospital and all of those things. And you just love for it all to talk to each other. It's one NHS is what you think. But actually, because of the NHS being centralised, but the interesting bit is they don't talk. It's so strange, isn't it, that actually how things are set up of moving away and taking Web3 and the blockchain and using it effectively, that actually you would say, that's my data. I know you're transacting it as an organization. That's fine. I've given you access to do so. But at any point I want access, and I want to be able to control access and who can have it and when. And right now that's really difficult to do in some organizations, because I know there was a thing, I think it was about 12 months ago, wasn't it, where they sent through a survey, and it was an opt-out survey where they were saying, we're going to process your data in a very different way. And a lot of people took that as, it will be attached to a service where I can access some information. There is a lot of skeptics that basically said, no, that's an opportunity to make money out of data, but hopefully that might be a step forward. But if you move it forward into Web3 and everything we just talked about, you have ownership of it. Yes, it's centrally, it's stored. So is it full or is it partial? But at the same point, I own that and I can take it anywhere. And I think that's the key. And I think that's just speeding up the process of, there's talk of, and it was in the news, I think, this week, where it's saying a doctor's surgery would never be like booking cinema tickets, or never it won't be that speedy. But it's like, it should be, because actually, if you've got the information right there, it shouldn't take you 5 different emails or to download something or go through everything else just to book me an appointment, because I have to tell you about myself every time, even though I could just give you that information. I think even just in a really basic example I could give there, I think that's just a great way of how it could speed things up right now if it was just adopted.
Yeah, so this is really an area of interest for me, because I think there's two reasons why blockchain is absolutely the solution to do what you're talking about. So the first is a little bit architectural, which is, anybody who has been involved in running IT inside a business or a small organization, medium-sized organization, a large organization, there is so much duplication of setting things up, checking security, maintaining, patching, all this sort of stuff. There's just a whole life cycle of things that you have to do. Whereas the blockchain has 99% of that baked in by default. So by writing to the chain, your data is essentially backed up across the whole network. You can make it secure by default. It's pseudo-anonymized by default, and you can make it private and encrypted as well. So you just get that out of the box just by using that technology. That's why when I talk to people in a more technical setting, I say, look, I think it's a foundational technology which you should think about in most of your applications and understand if there's a use case for it. But in the personal data space, I think it's immensely powerful. So there are organizations called data unions, which are using Web3 to let you tokenize your personal data. So healthcare is a really touchy topic. Obviously, love the NHS and support the NHS, but the reality is that your medical records in the UK, at least, are not technically your data. The NHS owns them, and the NHS has to consent to you actually having them. There isn't a way for you to get hold of everything right now, and there's lots of reasons why that's the case. But I personally think it's your information. I think it's your data, and I think you should be able to move it around. So by having it stored in the blockchain, you could do that. And what the data unions do, their vision is to say, okay, instead of you submitting all this data and then a third party owning it and you losing control, actually, we tokenize it all, we put it on the blockchain, and then you give consent to access. And you can turn off that consent at any time you want to. It cuts the link and the information is yours. And there are a series of organizations that are trying to bring this to life, and there are marketplaces that are being built up around this, and it's called first-party data. There are ones that exist at the moment where you can connect them to your bank account, and you can effectively monetize your banking data. There are some healthcare ones that are coming to pass as well, but this is 100% a blockchain use case, not centralized, not reliant on an existing company, completely secure, and you can control who has access to it. That is very, very, very difficult to do in a Web2 world, if not arguably almost impossible. So I think data portability and data privacy is one of the big reasons to use it.
Yeah, it's interesting, just going back to what you were saying before while you were speaking there, thinking there's probably so many business opportunities at many stages in that process as well. Like, you're going to need a company to verify that data as well and make sure you haven't fraudulently created it to look like somebody else, because you can do that. You can create an NFT, can't you? It doesn't necessarily have to represent an external truth. So I think it's fascinating. Well, I quite like that idea of that whole corruption side of things, and how decentralization is, because it takes the power away from a central organization, the ability to stop corruption, to be able to limit corruption. And I think we live in a world where, although it probably has been a bit more visible recently, there is a lot of corruption going on. And I guess the power of the technology to kind of help that and to try and end that is quite powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything where truth matters, the blockchain is a very sensible solution. So voting records, census data, political decisions. I mean, I think there's a huge amount of governmental and public service information which probably should be stored in a decentralized way. Why does Companies House hold all of this information on companies? How do you know it's accurate? I mean, one of the funny things that happens on Companies House is you quite frequently get the same director's name appearing multiple times, and the records aren't linked together. It's quite simple things like that, because it's complicated to manage at scale in Web 2. So I think public policies, government, public services, I think there's lots and lots and lots of use cases for blockchain, which when it starts to make more sense to people and it feels a bit less scary, I think adoption will speed up really quickly. Because when you push something to the blockchain for the first time and you actually see it live there and you realize that it is there and you have done that and now it's not going anywhere, it's a really powerful sort of feeling. It's totally different from building any other type of software where it could disappear at any point in time.
Yeah, definitely. Even something like patents. God, you wouldn't need a patent office, would you? A centralized patent office, because you could just prove, actually, here's the NFT to show that this was my idea.
Yeah, and to sort of layer the concepts in for people as well. I mean, everything we're talking about at the moment is about truth and identity. So where is the data? What is the data? What Ethereum brought to the party, and now there are what we call Ethereum compatible blockchains, is it brought something called the EVM, or the Ethereum virtual machine, which is basically a way of running mini software applications on the blockchain. So now we're moving into a position where we can run code, and this is what we call smart contracts. So now we can push a piece of code effectively to the blockchain, and we can have it run automatically, autonomously. We can have it check external data sources. We can essentially take some of the most important decisions that matter to us, and we can put them on the chain to know that they will always happen. That is a really crazy concept to try and get your head around, but it's again in a business setting, in a public service setting, it's really, really important. So the ability to codify those important decisions and have them always run and have them always execute is kind of what starts to build the foundations for what we know as the DAOs, the distributed autonomous organizations. So the idea that a charity, for example, could codify all of its rules of governance and actually put those onto the blockchain and always run. So the charity is always run in a certain way. The foundation is always run in a certain way, and the members have a say over it. It's just immensely powerful. I mean, think about the categories of problem that you can solve with that. And again, as we were saying, the sort of corruption that you can get rid of as well. So it's not without its flaws. It's not 100% perfect, but I think this is a vision for where things can go if we can keep driving adoption of the technology.
Yeah, and I think Dan's having some technical issues, but so he's dropped out. But it's really interesting. We had an episode last week, and last week we had a gentleman who'd been involved in the Apollo missions, had been and he did, what a fascinating Bill Halal, what a fascinating gentleman he was been and is. But we talked about the world and its maturity, and it's going through stages and what the world will become. And we've now focused on knowledge, and he runs a prediction agency in terms of tech now around what the next wave is, and we like an age of consciousness now, where we know knowledge. Knowledge is not enough. It's about beliefs, values, the impact, and everything else. And I shared one of my favourite stories that I think is out there, but has been muddied over, not through any fault of its own, but because a lot of the chaos of the financial situation and the crisis in Ukraine and everything else that's going on that's negative. And I think a lot of positive news is washed out by it, and people are just not listening to it because they turn on the news and like, I don't need any more negativity. It's coming to winter. But one of my favourite stories around what's happened at Patagonia, a brand that I've loved for such a long time because of how it's been run, how it was created by a rock climber who never saw himself as a billionaire, a founder, and that type of industry, and has now created something that is been given away. But actually, what you said in regards to the creation of that and how you can make sure that through the blockchain that trust will always do as it has said. So that can, in 20 years, they don't turn around and a lot of the stuff that's been said and gone back on in recent weeks. But if that was said, that you could create that always run true, that the trust uses the blockchain through the code and make sure that it pulls through, puts it in there, 97% of profit that's taken out when he's run through that will always be taken out and reinvested in sustainability and saving the environment. They can't argue with, they'll actually write this off as tax, and we can't do this with profit. They can't muddy it because they will know factually exactly what it is. We'll take it out, and hopefully at some point we'll be able to put that into whatever accounts, decentralized or centralized, whatever that would be, and make sure that is used for good. Imagine merging those two wonderful things to come out of it. Fascinating.
100%. I was on stage in London a few weeks ago talking about this exact topic to an audience, actually, and I used Patagonia, and I said what Patagonia have done is wonderful, but if they'd done it as a DAO, it would have been even better. And you're right, that's what needs to come now. Okay, why did they not do it as a DAO? Well, this stuff is very new still, so we're going through the development of the technology, and we're going through the standardization of it. But the other issue, which is always the case, is the legal system hasn't quite caught up with all this yet. So the enforceability of things against a DAO, the legal obligations of a DAO, its tax status, how does it function? I mean, a lot of these questions are unanswered. But what's interesting is, developments are taking place, and they're taking place quite rapidly. I mean, one of the principles we have in English, in the English legal system, and many legal systems around the world, is that you need to serve papers or notice on people to effectively engage them in litigation or put them on notice that something has happened where we need them to interact with the legal system. Well, obviously the issue with blockchain is we don't necessarily know who you are, but the beautiful thing is we know where everything is. So we know the wallet addresses of all of the people who are interacting with the chain. So a barrister in London served papers into a wallet. Now, we don't know who owns the wallet, but what it means is that whenever the wallet is reopened or effectively claimed, there are actually legal enforcement papers sitting inside it, waiting for them. So this is an example of where, again, to drive adoption, certainly in the UK, we need the legal system, we need the financial regulatory system to catch up so that we can move forward. I mean, the UK and the EU are actually regulating at the moment. There's something called the Financial Services and Markets Act, I think, which in the UK is regulating some of the crypto trading. And in Europe, they've got something called MiCA, which is regulating all digital assets generally. But we've got a long way to go before it's standardized. But yeah, putting decisions on the chain and having them auto-execute indefinitely or based on certain conditions is a remarkable characteristic. So I always try and layer it back up again. So we've started with this idea of a decentralized network, and all that was doing was storing data, basically. Then we put on top of that the idea that we could sort of trade with each other, move data around, transfer things to each other. This is where ownership comes to play. And then we put another layer on top, which is we can actually codify decisions, logic, put them into programs and have them be distributed across the chain as well. Now we've got a fully distributed cloud compute grid, storage grid, decision-making grid. That we've never had that before. So the things that we can do with that, I think, haven't even been fully kind of conceived or invented yet. And yeah, I'd love to see the Patagonia of tomorrow be relaunched as a DAO. And I suspect that, the younger people coming through the system now who are starting companies, running initiatives, charities, foundations, I think they're going to be looking at this technology and thinking, okay, we should use this, right? Because this is how we do broad civic participation. It's how we guarantee equitable outcomes. It's a different way of thinking than a standard corporate model.
And just on that, as Edufuturists, we'd be amiss to not bring it back. And to be fair, everything is related to education, the future of learning, and the future of what we need to prepare for. And you just touched upon it, that the future generation, the generation that's just coming through and starting, will start to link into this technology and start to see because of its benefits. You're somebody who's involved in it, who runs a company in it, and is involved in all of the different entities of it. Is it just simply creating the students of now and tomorrow, those ones that are just more about knowledge, but also pushing them to skills, so curiosity, creativity, consciousness, all of those kind of things? Is that what we need to kind of for roles and employers like yourself, Or is it greater than that? Do we need a different skill set? Are we just talking about coding and stuff? Or actually talking about a bigger thing in terms of preparedness for what's coming?
I think it's a shifting landscape. So this is an unpopular opinion, and I run a technology business and we do a lot of coding, but we code in raw terms fewer lines of code today than we did 25 years ago. And in 25 years from now, we will code even less. So, and the reason that that's happening is not just because of this low code movement, but because increasingly AI will be creating software for us. I mean, you can already do this. You can speak to a computer and have it generate the AI to represent an abstract concept. So I think in 2022, I certainly don't want to discourage anyone from a career in programming because we have a global shortage of engineers. So please learn how to program and apply to your local software development company. But in the future, it's going to look very different. And I'm not sure the industry is even ready for what it's going to look like yet. But I think that the general direction of travel is that those who create, those who have ideas and creativity are going to be more empowered than they've ever been before. And you sort of see this. I know this is tangential to education, but I think so much of what drives education is the culture of the time, and actually what do you need to succeed and what do you not need. And there's core skills, and then there's almost the softer zeitgeist around it. But if you look at social media influencers like Mr. Beast, for example, I don't know how many million followers the guy's got, but he did a burger restaurant launch, which was bigger than anything Burger King could have ever have done. And this is a single individual. And that is what decentralization looks like. It looks like pockets of influence that are coming from these networks of connected individuals, networks of interest, cultural harmony, really. So, a corporate couldn't have planned and executed what this one person did with his millions of followers. That is what I think decentralization looks like. So I think that the creators of tomorrow are going to be using this technology to build global movements and to build new communities that we can't even really imagine right now. I think LinkedIn is a little example of that in a way. I mean, I remember even 10 or 12 years ago when we started the business, LinkedIn was not taken particularly seriously. But now I go on LinkedIn and I have a profile and I have a background and I have a history, and I can do business with people that I've never met on the back of my LinkedIn profile. Now, I know that that's centralized because LinkedIn controls it, but it's an example, I think, of an educational skill set. Knowing how to run a LinkedIn profile did not matter 15, 20 years ago. I think for anybody in a modern workplace setting, it really matters now. What does your online presence look like? What's the perception of you? What's your personal brand? I think the metaverse requires you to have more of an understanding of that. And it turns us all into creators. So at the one end, yes, people will be programming and they will be continuing to program for quite a long time. But there will come a point where more and more people are empowered through off-the-shelf tools, through AI-powered capabilities to build this metaverse digital presence of themselves. And I think the blockchain and Web3 is only going to enhance that. Because if you went to my LinkedIn profile and you had a way to validate all of my academic qualifications, for example, or all of my client testimonials, or all of my whatever it might be, suddenly you've got this three-dimensional representation of me, and that's totally different. So I think teaching people what does it mean to exist in a digital world is really, really important, because it's going to become, for so many interactions, the first and last interaction that an employer potentially has with you.
Yeah, I think you've hit it on the head there, and it's something that we've been exploring for a while now. And although we do talk about kind of that decentralized technology side of things, we're actually seeing almost just that philosophy of decentralization in general perpetuating into lots of different industries, and especially education. And I think even though it's not necessarily directly influenced by the technology will back it up. So, for example, we are seeing big trends. Doing this podcast probably over the last 2 years now, one of the biggest trends we're seeing is private online education companies popping up, and parents are all around the world deciding to send their kids to these online schools, whether if it's just to top up what's going on from their mainstream education, or they're taking their kids out of mainstream education and they're exploring a menu of different types of education, and it's more personalized, and they could go to one school in the morning online and join up with a group of kids in America, join up with a group of kids in Africa in the evening, however it looks. And I think it's more of that, it's that taking ownership of their own education, and instead of a centralized system where you go and you're somebody else makes the menu up for you and delivers it on a day-to-day basis, and you have very little choice in that. And at the end of the day, they give you that certificate. Actually, in the next decade, I think we're going to move more to a place where, as a learner, I choose what I learn. So I might actually go to a physical school for an hour, then I might go to an online class with some kids in America, then I might just actually teach myself some stuff on Udemy or whatever it is. But actually, if I'm then gaining those qualifications or those micro credentials or whatever they look like on a decentralized network, and I can collect them and they become part of my blockchain skills wallet, for example, then it really puts the power, that decentralized power, back into the hands of the learner. And then school becomes something completely different altogether. Like the potential is limitless, really. So you could literally have a child who teaches themselves from whatever age anything they want because they're accessing it. And I suppose it's happening to a certain extent now, but the more formalized credential side of it, where the power and the proof and the identity sits with the learner, backed up by that technology, is exciting, and I think will only just propel it into the mainstream.
Yeah, and I think it becomes increasingly important when, in a sort of post-COVID world, you've got, I mean, remote working is nothing new, but what COVID did was it made it legitimate for virtually everybody. Okay. And so that does create this question. Yeah, it creates this question of credibility, authenticity. Who are you? How do I know who you are? And this sort of bridging of disciplines is what I think makes it all happen. I mean, in a sense, if you were sort of trying to look for that catch-all statement, what the metaverse needs to be for it to be the things people are claiming it will be, is that every aspect of my physical world is tokenized into the digital world, because that's really the only way it's going to work. If you want it to be indistinguishable, if you want it to be as powerful as my physical world, then my money needs to be there, my music collection needs to be there, my friends need to be there, my academic qualifications need to be there, and so my healthcare needs to be there. And that's no different really to what already happens. It's in pockets and you don't have control over it. Your healthcare is already digitized. My money is already digitized. My record collection is in iTunes. It's already digitized, but it's not in such a manner that I have the total control over it as I do in a physical setting. And so I think that's one of the things that happens. But I love the idea of the evolution of the school of tomorrow. I mean, I remember, when I started learning mobile development, which is quite a long time ago now, and Stanford released their entire semester for download through the iTunes education store for free. And I was just like, this is amazing. It's like I'm at Stanford, I'm hearing the Stanford lecturer. I'm seeing, now, of course, this isn't that revolutionary today, but if you go back 15, 20 years, this is like, wow, this is a big thing, actually. This is like educational establishments are suddenly not bounded by their physical locality anymore. And I think that is great. And I mean, you guys are the professionals, so this is sort of like this is a layperson's opinion, but I suppose I think about it with my son as well. And I think about what are the characteristics of great education. And I think one of the big characteristics is access to an amazing community, a community that really stimulates you and helps you grow and helps you think differently and challenges you and exposes you to new things. And I don't think there is a bigger community than the fully connected online world. What we need to do is make sure that we still get high quality tuition, we still get high quality credentials, we still get high quality accreditation coming through that system. You know, I don't think it needs to be a race to the bottom on quality. I think you can bring most of that with you, but you know, it requires a very different approach to the brand and organization that you're building from an academic perspective, I imagine. But I think the tech creates the opportunity for, you know, if your mission is to educate the world, educate as many people as possible, I think we're moving into a place where that's going to be really genuinely in reach.
I'm going to say my famous tagline, Dan, just put it out there. I think we could go on all night. Literally, Dan and Ben laugh at me all the time. But I think it's been a real... We've covered quite a few episodes on Web3. We've gone through the whole process. We've defined it. We've tried to put it in. But I think tonight's episode has really refurbed it for me in regards to where we're at, the potential, and where it could go in so many different facets. And it's been a bit of an eye opener for some of the, and just kind of got my cogs going. I could probably hear the hamster wheel going at certain points where I'm just thinking, and hopefully that's been the case for everybody that listens along. I think it's one of those things where it applies it to context and really gets you thinking about what the next steps are and gets everybody exploring it as a community, having conversations about it, because that's where it comes. When it becomes a conversation and something that people discuss rather than this thing that people ignore and are scared of, I think that's where it becomes more powerful. Like you say, let's bring it to the forefront. So it's been an absolute pleasure, Adam. Obviously, we've known each other a while now. Not touch base for, but I think to share your insights and everything else that goes with it with the audience has been something that we've really enjoyed. So thanks for coming on.
Well, thank you guys. I love what you're doing as well. So yeah, really happy to be on the show, and yeah, really excited to see where you guys take things next.
Right.
Perfect.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it.